Hi everyone, my name is Rudra Prasad. I'm a content marketer, filmmaker, and visual storyteller. Here I bring you this amazing DSLR filmmaking course from Eastern Media. Here we are going to learn everything about DSLR filmmaking, starting from exposure control, rules and regulation for filmmaking, equipments, lenses, camera positioning, camera movement and lighting, everything we are going to learn in this course. I am sure if you are an aspiring filmmaker or content creator or even a photographer, you are going to love this course and you are going to learn a lot from this course. We are going to use a cheap and affordable DSLR, which is a Canon 200D Mark II, or you can call it Rebel 2 or SL2, whatever you like, but you can use your own camera or whatever camera you have to learn from this course. I'm really excited about this amazing journey which we are going to cover together. But before you start this video, please download all the assets from the assets panel so that your learning process will be smooth and easy. So now let's get started with the second video where we'll learn a lot about filmmaking, and the first thing we are going to learn is exposure control. So get ready. Hello guys, again this is Rudra, and in this video we are going to learn about exposure control, which is one of the most important part of filmmaking. Exposure is basically how much light you are allowing to get to the sensor of your camera while you are taking photos or videos. For controlling the exposure of your footage, we have three main parameters. Number one is the aperture, second is the shutter speed, and the third one is the ISO. Instead of going for an auto mode in your camera, I recommend you to go for a manual control mode where you will have much more control over your exposure. Manual control gives you full control over your camera, and it is very important to know all these controls before you start filmmaking. This is an exposure triangle that you are looking at. All the three parts are the exposure controls, which you can use to control how much light you want to allow into your camera. We are going to learn about these exposure controls in the upcoming videos, so I hope you guys are excited to learn about it. Hi everyone, in this video we are going to learn about aperture. But before we start, I would like to talk about what is an aperture. An aperture is the mechanical opening of the camera. This is the opening in the lens which allows light to travel into the camera. Aperture control is referred to as the f value inside your camera, which allows you to take control over what amount of light you want to pass into the camera. The less the aperture value or the f value in your camera, the wider the opening will be. And the more the aperture value or the f value, the smaller the opening will be. Now it's time to talk about an open aperture. An open aperture allows more light to pass through, which obviously gives a good low light performance. It will also give a good blur in the background and gives a really good cinematic look. If you want to go for a good cinematic look and a very good low light performance, then I would recommend you to go for a 50mm prime lens. Why I am recommending the 50mm prime lens? The main reason is it has an aperture value of f1.8. But the normal kit lens has a lower f value of f4.0. So that's why a normal kit lens gives less low light performance. Now it's time to talk about a closed aperture and how it is going to affect your footage or exposure. Narrow or tight aperture or a closed aperture allows less light to pass through the camera, and that's why it has got a very bad performance in low light environment. It also gives less blur in the background, and that doesn't look like a normal cinematic view. So for shooting a cinematic video with good depth of field and good lighting, you should go for a wide open aperture. If you want good portrait photos or if you want good cinematic photos, then you should always go for a lower aperture value. Because of the lower aperture value in the 50mm prime lens, I always love to take photos in the night using that. I'm sure now you guys must have got the idea about how aperture controls the exposure and what is the meaning of an open aperture and a closed aperture. Now it's time to move on to the next video and learn more about the exposure control. As we have finished the first part of the exposure triangle, which is the aperture, now it's time to move on to the second one, which is the ISO. So let's move on to the next one. Hi everyone, in this video we are going to learn about ISO as an exposure control. ISO is an exposure control which basically has nothing to do with your light, but it is completely dependent upon the sensitivity of your camera. ISO is a complete digital exposure control. Its value generally ranges from 100 to 6400 and even some more high-end DSLRs it's more. A high ISO value leads to more exposed video, but the downside is that it leads to more noise in your footage, and you will also lose details in your videos. You need to keep one thing in your mind while you are shooting videos is that you should never cross your ISO value more than 1600. If you want to have good footage, then try to add more light into your subject or the area that you are shooting, and try to keep the ISO value as low as possible. This will also help you to avoid noise, and you will also get more details in your videos while you are shooting. So this is about ISO, and this is one of the most important thing that you need to keep in mind, because most of the people, when they are shooting in low light condition, they used to bump up the ISO to get more details in their footage, but they forget that increasing the ISO value doesn't usually help at all when you are shooting in a low light condition. Now, as we have finished learning about ISO, it's time to move on to the next exposure control, which is very important. It's shutter speed. So let's move on to the next one. Hi everyone, in this video we are going to learn about shutter speed. But before that, first of all, let us understand what is a shutter speed. A shutter is basically a mirror that goes up and down and allows light to get past the camera while you are taking photos or videos. If you click a photo in your DSLR camera, you must have heard a click sound while you are clicking a photo, which is actually the sound of the shutter. So let's understand how it affects light and how you can use it to control the exposure. A slow shutter speed allows more light, but it results in motion blur. A higher shutter speed allows less light, but it results in less motion blur in your footage. Our goal is to avoid motion blur and also allow more light to pass through and get a good exposure in our footage. To achieve this goal, you need to keep one rule in mind. To avoid the motion blur in your footage while you are shooting, keep the shutter speed to the double of your FPS, which is the frames per second that you are shooting. For example, if you are shooting at a 24 to 25 FPS, then keep your shutter speed at 1/50th of the second, which is double of the FPS. And if you are shooting at 60 FPS, then keep your shutter speed at 120th of a second. Well, that's all about the exposure part. So if you are shooting in a certain FPS, then keep the shutter speed double to that FPS so that you would not get any kind of motion blur in your footage. Well, that's all about exposure control and all the exposure triangle that I have explained about the aperture, the shutter speed and the ISO. So now it's time to move on to the next part, which is how we are going to measure the exposure. Maybe for you the exposure is good, maybe for someone else the exposure is not good. So how we can measure it, we are going to talk about it in the next video. So let's move on to the next one, and we're going to talk about it in a more detailed manner. Hi everyone, in this video we are going to learn how to measure exposure inside your camera using the histogram. Histogram is a graphical representation of the exposure. It's a graph on the camera display which helps us to measure the exposure. It shows if your footage is well exposed or not. An over or underexposed footage really doesn't look good. So when you look at your histogram, you can see three different portions in your camera histogram. The first is the black area, second one is the gray area, and third one is the white area. being shown on the histogram. The goal is to maintain the exposure in a way that maximum of the details are being captured. In an overexposed footage, the maximum details lies to the right of the histogram. In an underexposed footage, all the details lies to the left of the histogram. But in a perfectly exposed footage, all the exposure details lies in between, which is the gray area. When you are in your camera, make sure to adjust your exposure by looking at the histogram. Make sure to change the exposure as soon as you change the location or if you are moving into a different lighting condition. Well, that's all about histogram, which is a measuring tool we'll be using to measure the exposure. Well, let's move on to the next part where we are going to talk about focus and white balance. See you in the next video. Hi everyone, in this video we'll learn about focus and white balance. In most digital cameras which comes nowadays has an autofocus system. There are dual pixel autofocus, there are eye autofocus and different kind of autofocus systems are there nowadays. But if you want to take good cinematic shots, then you need to master manual focus. The more control you have on your camera, the better footage you can take. In manual focus, you can achieve good clarity by using 3 different ways. First, digital zoom, second one peaking, and third one is an external monitor. Digital zoom, you are just digitally zooming the image and you are looking at the details. And in the peaking, which is basically highlighting the edges of high contrast area. And third is using an external monitor to look at if your subject is in focus or not. Manual focus can be mastered over the period of time and practice. So go and do some experimentation, shoot in your manual mode so that you can get more ideas about how the manual exposure or the manual focusing system work. White balance is also very important when it comes to videography. It maintains the temperature of your scene. For a shot inside of a living room or inside of a house, the video is mostly in the tube light condition or normal lighting condition, which varies around 3200 to 3800K. For an outdoor shooting condition, the white balance is around 5600K. It's basically a measuring instrument of how much temperature you have in that particular scene. Well, in most digital cameras nowadays, we have previously made or auto white balance system. White balance presets that are already made. For example, if you are shooting in a cloudy condition, they have a preset for the clouding condition. If you are shooting an outdoor condition, they have a preset for the outdoor condition. You can choose from the presets according to your shooting condition or the shooting location. Well, now we have completed almost everything about exposure and some of the important technical elements of shooting videos in a DSLR camera. Now it's time to go for shooting videos. Now it's time to do some experimentation. There are so many things that we have talked about in the manual mode, manual exposure. We have talked about manual focusing, and all these can be mastered by a period of time and practice. If you are practicing all this, you will learn a lot in the technical part. But now it's time to move on to the next one, where we'll talk more about shooting videos. So let's move on to the next part. Hi everyone. As we have now finished the technical part, now it's time to move on to learn more about shooting videos. If you want to shoot videos, then you need to know about framing and composition. But you must be wondering, Rudra, I don't know about framing and composition. What is framing and composition? Framing and composition is basically knowing where to put your subject while you are shooting your videos. One of the most important rules which comes into play over here is the rule of thirds. And here are some of the good examples of rule of thirds. The rule of thirds is a composition guideline which tells you to place your subject in the left or right third of an image, leaving the other two thirds more open. Now, as you have learned about the rule of thirds and now you have understood where to place your subject, now it's time to do some exercise. I want you to go and shoot some photos and videos using the rule of thirds and send me on my social media handles. You can send me on my Instagram and I would love to see what you create. And this is just not a course where you are just learning about theories. This is all about implementation. Go and try all these theories in your filmmaking, while you are taking photos or videos, and you will learn a lot in the process. So now let's move on to the next part, which is framing. Hi everyone, in this video we are going to learn about framing. Framing is the presentation of visual elements in your videos. Framing can be classified into 4 different categories, which are number 1, establishing shot, number 2, long shot, number 3, medium shot, and number 4, close-up shot. First of all, let's talk about the establishing shot. Establishing shots are designed to make the audience understand where the action will be taking place. It shows the relation between people and their environment. Most of the time, it is a wide-angle shot, which captures maximum of the environment as a whole. Now it's time to talk about the long shot. In a long shot, the entire subject is in frame. Here it establishes the relation between the subject and the environment. And here are some of the tips to get a good long shot. First, give the subject some viewing space by putting the subject on either side of the frame by following the rule of thirds. Secondly, give the subject some head space. Last but not the least, give some space to the bottom to avoid the puppet effect, which basically means the subject seems to be walking on the edge of the screen. Now it's time to move on to the next one, which is the medium shot. Medium shot is also called as a waist shot, where we only cover the top part of the body, which is basically from the torso to the head. Here also you need to give some viewing space by putting the subject onto either side of the rule of thirds. Unlike the long shot or the establishing shot, which gives maximum importance to the environment in the footage, the medium shot gives equal importance to the subject and the environment. Now it's time to talk about the close-up shots, which is one of my favorite shots. In a close-up shot, we box the subject in a frame and it is used to mostly show the emotion of the subject. When you are talking about a close-up shot, it conveys the emotion of the subject and how the subject really feels. When you are taking a shot, make sure to put the eyes on the top section of the rule of thirds while you are shooting a close-up shot. When the subject is mostly emotional and you want to convey that same emotion to the audience so that the audience can relate to the subject, then you should try these type of shot. Well, that's all about the framing part and the ways to present your visual elements. You can go for a long shot, establishing shot, a medium shot, or a close shot to convey the different emotions. Now it's time to move on to the next video, and we'll talk about different angles of shooting. So I hope you have learned something new. Now I recommend you to go and try all these shots. Get some long shot, some medium shot, and some close-up shot while you are shooting videos. So let's move on to the next one. Hi everyone. In this video, we'll learn about camera positioning. Putting your camera in different angles conveys different type of messages and tells different stories to your audience. Mostly, you can classify the camera positioning into 3 different categories. Number 1, high angle shots. Here, the camera looks down at the subject from a higher angle. These kind of shots make the subject powerless and vulnerable. As you can see, a high-angle shot makes these characters powerless and feared. Now let's move on to the second one, which is the eye height shots. Here the camera is placed at the eye level of the subject, which allows the audience to feel the same emotion as the subject is feeling. In this way, your audience can feel more connected to the subject and more emotionally involved to the subject. Now the final one is a low angle shot. Here in these kind of shots, the camera looks up to the subject. These kind of shots make the subject more powerful and strong. Mostly this is used to show a hero's entry or a villain's entry into a shot. This is just to show a powerful personality in a video. If you are showing someone who is much more powerful, who is strong, then you should go for a low angle shot. Well, that's all about the camera positioning. You can go for a low angle shot, eye height shot, or a high angle shot to convey different emotion in your story. Here in this kind of shots, you can create different emotion and connect with the audience in a different level. Now it's time for you to create a small 1-minute video by using the framing and camera positioning. The concepts are well mentioned to you all, and I want you to create a small video and send me on Instagram or Facebook. And now it's time to move on to the next part, where we will learn about the lenses and different kind of lenses and how you are going to use it while you are shooting. Hi everyone, in this video we will learn about lenses and their uses. But before that, I want to tell you more about focal length. The focal length of the lens is the distance between the lens and the image sensor when the subject is in focus. There are several different types of lenses, but mainly it is divided into two main categories. Number one is zoom lens and second one is prime lens. Zoom lens, which are the most versatile lenses, you can change the focus point from one point to another, like 55 to 100 mm lenses, or maybe 18 to 55 mm lenses. All these are called zoom lenses. And the second category is the prime lenses, which has only one focus point, and you cannot change the focus point over the time. For example, 50 mm lens. 50 mm lens has only one focal point, which is 50 mm. You cannot change it. If we take an example, then the kit lens which comes with the general camera, which is the 18 to 55 mm lenses. Mostly in the small segment of cameras, you get the 1855 mm lens as the kit lens. It is basically a zoom lens. Here 18 mm is the lowest focal point and 55 mm is the highest focal point. If you take an example of a prime lens, then 50 mm prime lens is a good option to take an example. So it has only one focus point, which is 50 mm. According to the focal length of the lenses, again the lenses are divided into two different types. Number one is the wide angle lens. Number two is the telephoto lens. Wide angle lens are mostly the lenses which has the focus point of more than 50 mm the focal length. For example, if you are taking a 70 mm lens, then it is mainly called as a telephoto lens. But if you take an example as a 10 to 18 mm or if a 10 mm lens, then it will be called as a wide angle lens. It will cover much more area. 10 to 18 mm lens, 35 mm lens, all these are called wide angle lenses because the focal point is less than 50 mm. If you talk about the telephoto lenses, then the lenses will be having more than 50 mm of focal length. You can take an example of 250 mm or 170 mm or 70 mm lenses. All these lenses are called as telephoto lenses. Lenses play a major role in framing and composition. So knowing more about the lenses is very, very important while you are shooting videos. But now it's time to come to the next video where we will be talking more about the filmmaking process, and I'll be teaching you what is the 180-degree rule. So let's move on to the next video. Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to introduce you to the new concept of 180-degree rule of filmmaking. We use this rule to give the audience a good sense of orientation and create a relationship between two characters. When mostly two characters are in focus, maybe they are talking or they're doing something. So in order to give the audience a good sense of orientation, we use this rule. In order to apply this rule, you need to draw an imaginary line in between the two subjects. You should have all your camera position in the same direction of the imaginary line that you have drawn? Well, it is an example of giving the audience a good sense of orientation so that they will not get confused while they are watching that video. In this way, the viewer will not get confused at all with the angle and orientation while they are watching that video. Well, here is an example of the 180-degree rule. I hope now you have got the idea of how 180-degree rule works. Now it's time to move on to the next video. Hi everyone, in this video we'll discuss some of the most important aspects of filmmaking. These aspects that we will discuss here are: number 1, slow motion and its importance; number 2, B-roll footage; number 3, shooting for the edit or shooting for the video. First of all, let's talk about slow motions. By shooting at a higher frame rate, you will be able to get a good slow motion in your post-production or the editing process. I recommend you to shoot at least at 60 fps to get a good slow motion footage without any lags. The biggest advantage of slow motion video is that your audience will get more time to look at the details of the video. Mostly the action scenes are shown in a slow motion video so that the audience can grab more details out of that. Now let's talk about the B-roll footages. B-rolls help to visualize and add more details to your stories. It also allows the audience to feel the story with the B-roll footages. For example, if you're shooting an interview video, then adding B-rolls to your video will help you to build your story more visually. Now, the next concept, which is shooting for the edit or shoot for the video. This technique is used in the post-production phase to make your production or the editing process much more efficient. The best way to do this is to create a list of shots in the, maybe you can go for an Excel sheet. In that way, you will be on track, and you will know that what are the things that I need to focus on and how do I shoot. In that way, your editing or the post-production phase will be much more efficient. Well, these are the 3 concepts that I wanted you to know before you get into filmmaking. In the next video, we'll talk about moves and different camera movements and how you can achieve a good camera movement and footage by using different kind of movements. So let's get to the next video. Hello everyone, in this video we are going to learn about camera movements. Well, there are many different tools to move your camera like tripod, gimbal, slider, dolly and many more. A steady shot looks much more professional, and the most important thing is you should only move your camera when it is required. For a steady shot or a steady movement, always use a tripod. There are different kind of tripod, but the tripod that I would recommend you is a fluid head tripod. You can get good pan and tilt movement using a tripod, but you must be wondering what is a pan and tilt movement. Well, a pan movement is when you move your camera from side to side, from left to right or right to left, and a tilt movement is when you move your camera from top to bottom or bottom to top. The best part about a fluid head tripod is that it gives you a good tilt and pan shot while you are shooting. Movement in your video create depth and help the audience to differentiate between your foreground, background and subject. Another device that I personally like and helps a lot in movement of the camera is a gimbal. The gimbal are really cool devices having 3 different motors to stabilize the footage. You can use a gimbal to get more stabilized and smooth footage while you are shooting. Gimbals are more versatile, you can go anywhere and get good smooth photos and videos. Gimbal shots look much more better and professional. But for beginner filmmakers, I do not recommend to buy a gimbal or spend money on a gimbal. It is a really expensive device. But I recommend you to go for a tripod for shooting videos. Tripod are really good devices to get good smooth photos or videos. You can also create handheld shots by simply holding your camera on your hand, but the downside is that the handheld shot tend to be much more shaky and it doesn't look much professional. But here are some tips to get some good handheld videos. So the first one is close the distance between you and the camera while you are shooting the videos, and try to move your body instead of your hands. This will avoid the camera shake, and that way you can get good professional photos and videos. Do not walk while you are shooting. If you are walking, then the videos will be shaky and it will not look professional. Stick your camera to some steady object like tree, door, or anything that is steady to get the maximum steadiness in your footage. Well, that is all about the camera movements. I have talked about how you can get good handheld photos and videos, how you can get tilt and pan movement using your tripod, and what is the gimbal and the idea about gimbal. I hope now you have got some good idea about the camera movement and how to achieve a good camera movement. Now it's time to move on to the next video where we are going to talk about lighting, which is very, very important. Hello everyone, in this video we'll talk about lights. Lights are very, very important in a video. A good lighting makes a good video. Light creates depth in your videos and make your videos look better and professional. For lighting, we mostly use a 3-point lighting system. In the 3-point lighting system, there are 3 main lights. Number 1, fill light. Number 2, key light. And number 3 is a backlight. Fill light fills the subject and the room as a whole. Always make sure that your fill light is a soft light instead of a hard light. You can also go for a diffuser if it is required. You can also use your normal room light to get a fill light. Then comes the key light. A key light is the most powerful light and it creates depth and shadows in your videos. It will also help you to increase the depth of field by differentiating the subject from the background. Well, a key light is very, very important. You can go for a key light in a very budget platform like around 7,000 to 10,000 rupees. And a key light help you achieve better result and good professionalism in your videos. Last but not the least is the backlight. A backlight is a hard light which comes from the opposite side of the key light, and it helps to create an outline and differentiate the subject and the background. Well, that's all about the lighting, fill light, key light and backlight. Now we have almost covered everything about filmmaking. The key concept that you need to understand: lighting, camera movement, how camera works, different technical things and different concepts. Now it's time for you to move on and shoot some good videos. Try to send me on Instagram at what you have learned and how you have applied it in real life. Now you have got enough idea about filmmaking as a whole. Now you can become a good filmmaker if you have good creative ideas, good stories to tell. I recommend you to go and do it right now.